Welcome in once again to the most accurate podcast here at 444 Fantasy. I am a slightly sick Matt Okada, as you may be able to tell, and I am joined, fortunately, by a healthy and strong voiced John Paulson. And football is back. Oh boy, John, how you feeling?
Feeling all right. It was an interesting game last night as a Mark Andrews manager, and I think two of my four leagues or three of my four leagues. Maybe it was just two. I know I've got him in Scott Fishbowl. Got him in my long-running keeper league. A little stressful in terms of usage, but we'll talk about that. I would say football's back. We got the Packers tonight, so in Brazil, so that should be fun.
Yes, that should be very interesting. First time ever. And we have a lot to get to on the show. We're going to do some TNF takeaways. We'll have news and injury updates, of which there are many, obviously, heading into week one. Hit briefly on some of the key matchups or games to watch and target. And then get into John's starts and sits of the week to close out the show, which are some pretty key things. Also, you can check out his article for that. But spoiler alerts. So we'll get to this later in the pod. Let's start off with Thursday Night Football. Chiefs won 27-20, barely by a centimeter. And the reason that the centimeter happened was the star player of the game, and maybe the most interesting person to talk about in all of fantasy right now, and certainly the top of week one waivers, Isaiah Likely. So give us your biggest takeaways, your players of note from this game, John.
Yes, it starts with Isaiah Likely, 9 for 111 and a touchdown on 12 targets. Conversely, Mark Andrews had 2 for 14 on 2 targets. Obviously, Mark Andrews didn't look great when he did catch the ball. He just fell down one time. He was playing a normal amount of snaps, so I don't know that whatever mysterious injury he was dealing with after the car crash that he had. John Harbaugh said he was fine for week one a couple weeks ago, or would be fine for week one. I don't know if there's any sort of secret stuff going on, but he was out there his usual amount, 74%. Last year, he played about 76%. Basically, the change here is that they are going to play a lot more 12, it looks like, with Isaiah Likely on the field with Mark Andrews. And it was a lot of, Lamar Jackson dropping back. Offensive line didn't protect him very well, so he was kind of scrambling in scramble mode right away, wasn't looking downfield to Andrews a whole lot. And Andy Holloway, the footballers, watched every snap and every route and said that it looked to him like the Chiefs defense was completely focused on taking away Andrews, which allowed Likely and Zay Flowers and others to get open. So I'm not panicking. Obviously, you would not want this to be your opening game for your stud tight end that you got. I still think he was a good value in the 4th round. I think now, knowing what I saw last night, I don't think I would take him quite that early, maybe 5th or 6th round still. It's not a huge drop off. This is a player who has averaged at least 50 yards receiving, I think, since his rookie year. He will get it going, and teams are not going to allow Isaiah Likely to do what he did last night just at the expense of taking away Mark Andrews. So he'll get his, I think. And just kind of going through the rest of the game, Derrick Henry, 13 carries, 46 yards, and touchdown. It sounded like people are alarmed by this. It's not completely shocking with the Chiefs getting out to a lead that Henry would not see a ton of carries. The offensive line, again, didn't run block a whole lot very well. I do feel like Baltimore is one of these really competent teams that is going to improve its weaknesses as the season wears on. So I'm not panicking about the offensive line either. And I think he'll do better when they have leads, which they should have leads for most of the season. Justice Hill obviously had a good game, 6 carries for 52 yards on 8 targets. We did identify him as a late round, like PPR type target, attrition play. And it looks like he's going to play a lot, especially when the Ravens are trailing. He scored 11.2 in PPR, or actually 11.5, I think, because he had 1 carry for 3 yards. Isaiah Pacheco, much to Connor Allen's surprise, did really well. Regular listeners know I had to talk him down after a sake-fueled bender in Chicago. I took Isaiah Pacheco in the 3rd round of our main event league, and he was incensed. And I gave him the pitch, and he finally was on board. And finally, by the end of the offseason, he was recommending Pacheco as a pick. So it's 17 touches, 78 yards, touchdown. I'm gonna take my loss on Mark Andrews right now, but I'm gonna take my win on Isaiah Pacheco. Rashee Rice, another player, especially towards the end of the season or end of the offseason, when realizing he's not going to get suspended this year, very likely with the December court date. 7 for 103, 9 targets. It'd be interesting to watch this, especially with Xavier Worthy having the 2 touchdowns and 68 total yards. When Marquise Brown is back, he's got that shoulder injury, might miss a game or two. Obviously missed one game, might miss another game. We'll see when he gets back. This is going to be a really dangerous offense with these three and Travis Kelce at tight end. Travis only had 3 for 34 and 4 targets. I don't know if Taylor Swift was a little bored last night with the low output from her man, but I think she's a team player and like to see the Chiefs win. It was a crazy game. I was sort of hoping it would go into overtime just to have that sort of kick off the season. I also needed some fantasy points and some pick'ems to come through, which they didn't. Needed overtime for those. But a toe, I think Mark Andrews keeps his feet in. If he gets that catch, I think he's just got more awareness than Isaiah Likely because he's a vet. But Lamar Jackson didn't throw it to him. Oh, you're on mute.
Hello. Pretty much the entire game, unfortunately. I will say to that note, I fully agree with the Chiefs game plan, and lingering injury for Andrews really seemed to play into what happened in this game. I don't expect that to be the case. I'm not panicking on Mark Andrews either. To me, the biggest takeaways from this are likely not because he replaced Andrews in the sense that Andrews was a non-usable tight end in this game and likely was, but just because it looks like likely might be the go-to receiver, or right after Zay Flowers, the go-to receiver. Like, he's built to be a very good receiver, and he showed it. And he's shown it every time he's gotten targets in his career. So I like adding likely. Like, if you told me Mark Andrews was going to be back to Mark Andrews immediately next week and stay that way for the rest of the season, I would still want to add Isaiah Likely, because it's not like they have a true number one wide receiver. Zay Flowers did get a lot of targets, but once again, they were a lot of short area stuff. And Rashad Bateman got a couple chances, had some nice plays, but Likely led the team with 12 targets. So he's a huge, huge target for me on waivers. I think he could have a great season. He's very talented. I like the breakout opportunity there.
Yeah.
And then the other one for me is Rashee Rice. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to comment on Likely. He played 66% of the snaps. Last year, it was more like 20 or 30 with percent of the snaps with Mark Andrews. So they're playing a lot more 12, which I think will boost both of them. They both could produce tight end 1 numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. The other big one for me is Rice. I know that everybody was super excited about Worthy because he flashed right out the gate, first touchdown, and he scored 2 of them in the end. To me, this might be a hot take, but it's where I'm going to stand for week 1. I think that Worthy is what they wanted Kadarius Toney to be. I think that he's going to have a lot of these games where he has a couple huge plays, but he's going to have a lot of other games where we don't see him that much. I mean, he only had 3 targets and 1 carry in this game, but he had just happened to score on 2 of them, and he'll do that a lot because he's the fastest person in the NFL. But I don't like the fact that the usage won't be there enough to be reliable. So I'm not freaking out about Worthy like some people are. I am freaking out about Rashee Rice, like it seems like most people aren't. 9 targets, 7 catches, 103 yards. He looked incredible. He was great last year. Everybody talked about, well, he's only getting targets because no one else is there. Maybe he's getting targets because he's good. That's what we saw in this game. I think we could see that the rest of the season. I really like the upside for Rice. So those are my big takeaways. On the Justice Hill thing, definitely needs to be added because they're clearly going to use him in receiving situations. But as you mentioned, this was an odd game script for the Ravens. They're not going to be trailing for the entirety of most games throughout this season because I do think they're one of the best teams in the league. They just happen to be playing against probably the best team in the league. So Justice Hill got 8 targets and caught 6 of them. It was great. Still should be added, but I don't think we're going to see maybe, double-digit PPR points every week. All right. That is Thursday Night Football. Incredible game. 1 centimeter away. I will note it was not 1 centimeter away from overtime because Harbaugh was calling for 2
that's right.
before they overturned the play, which is the right call. Good job, Harbaugh. Unfortunately, not good job Likely, except for the rest of the game. All right, let's get into some news and injury updates. Some of this is going to be over the course of the past week because we have not recorded since last Friday. Right off the top, let's just note Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams both signed contracts with the 49ers. Huge. Obviously, this was the story of the offseason. We were waiting for forever to find out what was going to happen to Brandon Ayuk. He was absolutely going to the Steelers at one point. There's a good chance he was going to the Commanders at one point. He's not doing any. He's staying in San Francisco, as is Trent Williams. Pretty much everything stays as is. Any big takeaways here that you want to note?
They're really, really good for Brock Purdy to keep his top receiver and his tackle and have that protection. Good. This is good. Given the options that we were getting with Ayuk, this is the best landing spot for him too, from an efficiency standpoint. He doesn't see a ton of targets in San Francisco, but it's just a highly efficient offense as he makes the most of them. So I think he's underrated rankings wise, and I know we're getting out of draft season now, but his consensus wide receiver 21 or something like that. I have him in the top 10. I think there's a little bit of growth for Purdy here as he's a growing quarterback, and this offense, this passing attack grows a little bit. And just given his distributions last year, even with Debo and Kittle on the field, Ayuk's numbers should grow a tad as well.
And one other bit of contract news: Samaje Perine, and we actually got to see him, I think, on one play. He had 2 targets last night. Signed a deal with the Chiefs, 1-year deal after he was released by the Broncos. Also, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was placed on the reserve list, so he'll be out at least 4 games. This may be a little bit related to that, and maybe a little bit related to filling in the Jerick McKinnon role. That being said, we saw Isaiah Pacheco get 3 targets, catch 2 of them for 33 yards. There was a good amount of concern from some people that Samaje would really eat into Pacheco's receiving work based on what he did last year in Denver. Do you still think that? Obviously, this was game 1 with Samaje, so he could ramp up to more usage. Does that concern you at all for Pacheco?
I think he might ramp up to more usage. I think we're not out of the woods yet when it comes to Pacheco's third down passing work. But this is actually, this is very good from a Pacheco standpoint to get the 17 touches and all those targets, because they're not obviously showing that they're panicking and going to plug in Perine, straight out the gate. He's only been in town for a week or so.
Less than a week, yeah.
Yeah. So I think, things could change, or if Pacheco starts to struggle at all on pass protection or catching the ball, things could change. But I think Pacheco looks like he's a real solid RB1 right now.
One last bit of kind of contract news. It's actually lack of contract. Jamar Chase still doesn't have a new contract. Now, he's 2 years away from needing one, but he demands it now because all the other receivers are getting theirs. He has practiced multiple days this week. He had previously been holding out of practice or just showing up, but not actually practicing. There's been a severe lack of full camp practice and prep for him, which we've seen create a bit of issues sometimes for players, leave them a little bit out of shape. I think that the expectation is that he will be playing come week 1, even if he doesn't get a contract. Do you have any concerns over Chase?
A little bit that this contract isn't done yet. I thought that they would get it done by the end of the weekend. NFL teams are, in general, paying their stud receivers. They know how valuable they are. It's not like a running back situation where the difference between what the player thinks he's worth and what the market says he's worth is so vast these days. At receiver, it tends to be a lot closer, and they can typically get things done. That we saw that with Ayuk. He is practicing this week, so I would assume he's going to play through this, and either he's being told that they're very close on getting a deal done, or it's not a complete standoff, because if it were, he might sit out a game or 2. We also have a injury, which I don't see on our injury list because I think it just is popping up, is that T. Higgins was not practicing today with a hamstring, and that could just be a rest day for him as they get him ready for this weekend, or it could be a concern in terms of a Friday downgrade, because those are generally concerning. Some teams will occasionally just give a player a rest the day before, but most teams like to have their players out there on Friday for the final walkthrough.
Yeah, especially when they're as young as Higgins. The rest days, you more commonly see it with vets. This is a little concerning. So keep an eye on both those guys heading into Sunday, and on obviously Burrow as a result. That would be tough if he had either only one or none of those two. All right. Several bits of offensive scheme news that has kind of trickled in this past week. So we'll hit on those, and then we'll get to injuries. Greg Roman, new offensive coordinator for the Chargers, says that they will employ a hot hand approach with Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. I think this largely is maybe somewhat expected because they brought them both in. Gus Edwards has never really been I'm a bell cow true number one guy. J.K. Dobbins has always been extremely explosive when he's got an opportunity, albeit he's coming off an Achilles injury. I don't know how much that explosiveness will be there, but if he does have a hot hand at some point, it looks like he'll have the shot. Does this at all change your outlook on these two guys? I think we had mostly had Edwards a little ahead of Dobbins, but Dobbins as an interesting sleeper because of that upside.
Yeah, the last few days I've moved Dobbins ahead with this positive news coming out of camp and how explosive he looks. All the camp video that I'm seeing, he looks like his old self. I don't know that he's going to be able to stay upright, but I think he's the better roll of the dice if you're looking for upside in this offense, as opposed to, I think Gus Edwards is fine as a early season sort of zero RB target to get you through the first month or so. He might end up, Edwards, having a really good year. He's never carried the ball more than 200 times in a season, 198 for 810 yards and 13 touchdowns last year. Pretty solid. And he has a 4.9 career yards per carry, although he was down to 4.1 last year after 4 straight seasons of 5.0 or higher. Just seeing him in practice, he looks like the bus. He's bigger, yep. 238 pounds. So this could be committee. It will be a committee, I think, to start with these two. Maybe Vidal gets in there, but as long as Dobbins is starting to trend towards his old self, I think he could really be the steal in this offense. But he's got to stay healthy, and he hasn't been able to do that, for several years now. I just think in 11th to 13th round where he's going, it's a worthy roll of dice.
If you have either of these guys on your bench and you have a flex spot open, I'd be putting in Edwards and not putting in Dobbins. Would you agree with that for now?
Yeah, I mean, if you have both.
No, I'm saying, sure, definitely if you have both, but I'm saying even if you have just one or the other, I feel like Edwards is going to be the safer play in a flex spot, and Dobbins we need to see.
Probably, and you're also talking about a player coming off of a pretty nasty injury versus Edwards, who is supposedly healthy, although he was missing some time in camp as well. I mean, I could see Edwards' floor at 10 carries, where we might see only 6 or 7 carries for Dobbins, depending on how things go.
All right, bouncing over to Dallas. Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy says that they will commit to the run and be good at it. But more importantly, perhaps, there are rumblings from the Dallas beat that Rico Dowdle is the early favorite for the lead role. I think many people had highlighted Dowdle as a potential interesting sleeper or value RB because Zeke is 48 years old, and we don't really expect him to probably be what he was back in the old Dallas days. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that Zeke was still getting drafted higher. I might have to pull ADP up to be sure on that. And there was a lot of talk that, it was pretty close. They might have even been back to back at some point. Mostly, we've been expecting Zeke to get the goal line work, and for it to be a split that was too wide for anyone to be an high-end RB2 or even close to an RB1. Do you think there's any chance with this news that Dowdle just runs away with the job, given what we've seen from Zeke in recent years?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're comparing Zeke to his old self, which he was one of the best running backs in the league. If you look at their PFF grades, their advanced metrics over at PFR, it's not like Dowdle is any better at this point compared to, or at least last year, compared to last year's Elliott. They're both kind of mediocre and all those things. Maybe Dowdle just needs more experience and is more of an ascending player and will thrive in a bigger role. But it's not like it's a situation where it was Michael Turner for the Chargers getting an opportunity to be the starter in Atlanta. And, we all knew that he was awesome, or we thought that he was awesome, and then he turned out to be awesome. This is just a kind of an ugly committee with Elliott, Dowdle, Dalvin Cook, Deuce Vaughn. I don't know if it's going to happen right away. Dowdle might be able to take over if Elliott is unsuccessful being the lead back, but I think out of deference to Elliott and the veteran that they're going to give him the start and he's going to have the most carries in week one. I'm not 100% sure on that because I've got him projected for 10.3 carries and Dowdle for 9. So I do think they're basically going to rotate series right now, and then Elliott will get the goal line work. And I think he might get a little bit more of the pass pro receiving work as well.
Yeah. In New York, Brian Dable will be taking over calling plays for the Giants. He kind of had popped in to do that a couple times over the last couple years when things were going very, very poorly for them. But now he will be straight up the play caller for the offense there. What does that mean to you, if anything? Does it raise your hopes in any of these players?
I would say so. I mean, I think he's realizing that he's on the hot seat, and if he can help his own cause by calling plays, then he's going to do that. I think this is a weird offense. I think I don't have a lot of faith in really anyone other than Neighbors seeing a ton of targets. Daniel Jones might be okay. He might bounce back. He's had seasons where he's been decent and been a good fantasy quarterback because of his running and like fairly efficient passing. And then I think Devin Singletary is pretty intriguing as a very cheap RB3 type who's likely to post RB2 numbers just out of sheer volume. I mean, if he gets a touchdown in any given week, he's likely to have another 15 to 18 touches and, maybe 60 to 80 yards. So he's going to vastly outproduce his ADP if he's getting that, if this offense is a little bit better than what people think. So other than those 3 players, really, I don't really have a lot of confidence in Daniel Jones. It's really Neighbors and Singletary here. And, I think Dable sees the writing on the wall and is trying to, impact his own future as much as he can.
Worth noting, the last time Dable was an offensive coordinator and not a head coach was back in Buffalo in 2021. Josh Allen was incredible. I think Daniel Jones would very much like to mold himself a little bit after Josh Allen. Good luck with that, Daniel Jones, but it would be the goal. And Stephon Diggs had 164 targets, 103 catches, 1,200 yards, and 10 touchdowns, with Cole Beasley also seeing over 100 targets. So that's certainly the upside goal for Neighbors, and maybe even someone else comes in shows up in that receiving core, although that certainly hasn't happened over the years. That would be the positive spin hope for New York. We will see. And then lastly, Doug.
I was just going to give you a couple updates on the Bengals from our wonderful Bleacher Nation fantasy app, which is the fastest updating player news app on the market. Make sure you have it. It used to be the Fantasy Life app, and now it's been rebranded as the Bleacher Nation fantasy app. Jamar Chase says a contract is in reach, a game time decision for Sunday. Ooh. So there's a possibility if they don't get the contract done, he might not play. That's how I'm reading that. But it is good news that the contract's within reach. I think they get it done beforehand. And then Zach Taylor on T. Higgins. He had a little hamstring tweak yesterday. We'll see how it goes. So we'll see how it goes. I don't like that. I don't like that phrasing. And it is a setback as of yesterday. So opportunity for the rookie there, Burton, right? And Andre Yosevich.
Yep.
I'm trying to get that guy's name down.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at right now with the Bengals. Just wanted to update listeners on that.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Ooh, Higgins managers in shambles right now. Last bit of scheme news. Doug Peterson and the Jaguars are still deciding whether he, the head coach, or Press Taylor, the offensive coordinator, will call plays for that team. Do you have a strong feeling if this goes one way or the other, or is it just a wait and see approach?
Yeah, I don't know. I looking at this, I think Peterson, I certainly have more confidence in him. And he called them last year, right? So this is an interesting change if they decide to do this at this point. It doesn't seem like the Jaguars offense is at the point where he should be handing over duties like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I am fairly bullish on Trevor Lawrence and company in general. And this game, especially this week with the high over under is appealing from a fantasy standpoint, but they should have this decided already. I mean, Why are
Yes.
we still trying to decide who's calling plays 1 week before the season?
Wild to me. Hopefully that works out for them. All right, let's hop over to some injury news. Christian McCaffrey. He returned to practice this week, finally. That is the news coming off this calf, and I've seen it noted as also an Achilles-related injury a few times this past week. Not something new, just recovering. It had been roughly a month since he had practiced. He is now practicing again. That's not what you love to see with your number one overall pick. He is back, so that's a little positive. But what is your concern level on McCaffrey heading into week one?
Well, when this injury happened and he was sitting out, their statement from the team and from him was that if this was a game week, then I'd be playing and practicing. So like I wasn't too concerned about it. With a veteran like him, you just want to let him rest and heal up as much as possible before week one. So I'm not too concerned about it at this point. I was still advocating drafting him RB1 overall. I think one thing to note, especially in shallow like home leagues where maybe people aren't on top of things, Jordan Mason is like one of the most appealing handcuff attrition stashes to just have on your bench waiting for a potential injury because of the efficiency of this offense, the efficiency of this running game. And he also, in his short stints playing last year, really graded out well as a running back. So we think he's talented, and Elijah Mitchell is not with the team anymore. So it's Mason's job if McCaffrey were to go down. He's a player you want on your bench in case that happens.
Yeah, and very worth checking your waiver wire because Elijah Mitchell was the guy most of the draft season. It's possible Mason was not drafted in your league, and if so, and no one's paying attention to the news, he might still be there. I'll just throw a random name question at you just to see. Versus a guy who has maybe some more upside without the injury in front of him, but who also could be very good with the injury in front of him. Ty Chandler or Jordan Mason, who would you rather have on your bench?
Well, in the draft rankings, I have Chandler at 48, Mason at 50, but that is just the projections that assume that Chandler is more involved in the offense for the Vikings than Mason is on a weekly basis. If you're just talking upside, I would say Mason ahead of Chandler, in that it's just a better offense, and he's just as good of a player. And we also have both Jones and McCaffrey have some injury history, but McCaffrey is already dinged up, whereas Jones appears to be fully healthy.
All right, go find Mason, see if he's available. Other injury stuff. Russell Wilson, his status for this week one is up in the air right now with a calf injury. We were waiting for the whole offseason to find out who's going to be the starter. He got named the starter, and now all of a sudden he also might not be starting because he's injured. What does this do for the pass catchers there or the offense in general? So George Pickens, Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren. And does it affect, if Justin Fields is playing, are you considering him a top 12 quarterback?
How did we get here? Because we thought we had this. I would say, here's my advice, is that if you have any question about your quarterback position and you have one guy on the roster right now, maybe you're sitting on Jared Goff, you're doing the Goff gambit, and you're thinking about streaming when he's on the road, or something like that, or you ended up with Rodgers or Cousins, your old guy favorites, Matt, and you just want some upside. Like, I would make a spot for Fields just to see how this calf thing plays out for Russell Wilson. He's no spring chicken. Calves can be tricky. We've seen that in the past. And if Fields comes in and plays well in week one, he may not give up the job. So I think Wilson is still the starter when healthy, but we'll have to see how healthy he is, and whether or not Justin Fields is able to take the job. If he does get the start in week one, take that job and run with it.
Yeah, it's not like there's a super long leash here to work with here. It took them right up until the last week before the season to decide between Wilson and Fields. So I think if Fields, if he's going 500 and playing decently well, I think there's a very good chance Wilson doesn't get his job back even when he is healthy. So, and if Fields is a starting quarterback, he should be a starting fantasy quarterback. He's been, top 6 very often when he's out there, no matter how bad he's throwing the ball, because his rushing is so valuable. So worth looking into that. Briefly, TJ Hawkinson, the Vikings said they are targeting a week 7 or so return for him. So just something to note. Obviously, he's drafted in your league. So if he's on or if he's on someone else's team, maybe it's something to remember for around that time of year. Ooh, this guy is tired of not having TJ Hawkinson playing. Maybe I can snag him before he comes back. Probably won't happen because that guy probably waiting with bated breath for Hawkinson to come back, which is what you should be doing. But also worth noting, I would not expect 100% TJ Hawkinson the first week he comes back, be that week 7 or whatever. Anything to add there?
Yeah, I did move him up in the draft rankings with this targeted at week 7. I had him missing more of the season for most of the offseason. He ends up now at I have him missing about 6 games because I believe that they have a week 6 bye, so he's going to miss the first 5 for sure, and then I figure he'll miss one more game. So I've got him at 11, and that puts him at tight end 15 now, which makes it a little more palatable. This is just a different situation, though, without Kirk Cousins there. I wouldn't expect him to produce at the same level if Sam Darnold is a quarterback.
The Jets have said that Mike Williams, who has been dealing with a knee injury, recovering from a knee injury, will begin the season on a snap count. Probably means you're not rolling Mike Williams out there if you were intending to, which would be not ideal because I think we were drafting him more as wide receiver 4. So this does maybe mean that Aaron Rodgers has one less weapon at a full gamut of snaps. Any major takeaways here?
Not
Garrett
major
Wilson targets.
Yeah, I'm interested to see Xavier Gibson if he's the slot guy. He had a good camp. I'm really interested because I've got him currently in my starting lineup. With Scott Fish. I want to see. That's the other thing about these returning kick returns. There was only 2 last night, and they were just
so boring.
They seem like they were just happy to give the other team the ball at the 30.
Yeah.
So if that continues, then all this return drama is for naught. But I'm interested to see if Gibson is a slot. It could be Lazard because of the big slot role, because Aaron Rodgers really trusts him and likes him. I think with Mike Williams maybe playing half the snaps or something like that, Lazard probably picks up more with Garrett Wilson and Gibson out there in the slot. So interested to see how that all plays out. I wouldn't say this is a huge downgrade for Rodgers because I think we were sort of expecting Williams to be limited in the first few weeks. And I think if you drafted him, it's still okay because, as you mentioned, you're probably getting him as a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, and you're not needing to start him this week. It's certainly not against the 49ers, who are pretty good on defense.
Yeah. Kyle Pitts, please, for heaven's sakes. He has been limited with a hamstring injury, but reportedly is not a significant one, and he won't miss more than a couple snaps in week 1 as a result of it. Still, I hate my star players having hamstring injuries coming into week 1. Any concern level here with Pitts?
Yeah, anytime there's a player with a hamstring injury this early in the season is a little bit concerning. It's a weird phrasing that they use there. Just not gonna miss more than a couple snaps. That's just an odd thing to, I guess, say. I don't know. Maybe they're saying he's okay. He says that was the tweet. Damn, 2 less plays in Iraq got you all concerned. I'll see you Sunday. So he's saying he's gonna be fine. We'll see how it goes. You'd rather have everybody healthy right now heading into week 1, but it is what it is.
Couple bits of good news. Bills wide receiver Curtis Samuel with that turf toe practiced in full this week. Those turf toes can really be lingering issues, so it's really nice to see him practicing in full. Obviously, one of John's favorite sleepers. So we'll get to see him hopefully at full speed in week 1. Puka Nacua also practicing in full. That's huge, obviously, was dealing with that knee injury. Sean McVay had said the entirety of the time that he was dealing with it that it wasn't a big deal. But it is nice to see him practicing in full, so we should be able to expect 100% from him. Jahmyr Gibbs, who has also been dealing with a hamstring injury, says he'll be ready to play week 1. Hopefully, I mean, that sounds a little bit better than what Kyle Pitts said, but was still a little concerned with the hamstring injuries, but he should be full speed. Keep an eye on that, make sure that he is. And then just one little tiny thing, Josh Downs may miss week 1 with an ankle injury, Colts wide receiver. That leaves the door open for the number 2 spot behind Michael Pittman Jr., maybe for rookie Adonai Mitchell to step up. That could be an interesting thing to watch. Some people have Josh Downs as a sleeper. I kind of like Mitchell more anyway, so this would be a nice little jump start if it works out. All right. Let's briefly hit on some of the matchups or the big games to watch here. You've got a few noted. What are you looking for in week 1?
Yeah, I think this early in the season, we don't have updated adjusted fantasy points allowed, which is our signature strength of schedule metric at 444. It's especially nice because it uh, adjusts for a team's defensive team's strength of schedule against a specific position. So if a defense, it has 3 games against a gauntlet of the best running backs in the league or the best running games in the league, then the SOS will account for that. And, so we have a apples to apples comparison. We won't have that until week 4. So right now we're working off of matchups from last season. We have to get enough data in the system in order to give you a trustworthy number. So I'm taking, our matchups are, number 1 against tight ends, number 32 against running back matchups with a grain of salt because things have changed. Some of the teams we know haven't changed a whole lot. We have an idea, but the things I like to look at all year, but especially the first 3 weeks, are the over-unders. Rams, Lions, 51 over-under, which is the highest this week. Both teams have bad defenses or mediocre to bad defenses. It's in the dome, so you want to kind of target players. If you have a tiebreaker and they're close in the rankings, you might want to go with the team that the player that has a higher total is playing in the game with a higher total. Another one I'm really interested in to watching is Jacksonville and Miami, 49.5 over under. And then on the flip side, I was looking for 1 or 2 standout games that have really low totals, but there's like a bunch. So there could be some ugly games out there, all with 42, nothing under 40, but all 42.5 or lower. The Panthers, Saints, the Vikings, Giants, the Steelers, Falcons, Patriots, Bengals, Broncos, Seahawks, Cowboys, Browns, and Commanders, Bucks. And it's like a combination of mediocre quarterback play, I would say, in most of these games, except for maybe the Cowboys, and good defenses, or mediocre to good defenses. So these are the games that maybe you want to avoid. There's going to be some fantasy players in these games that shine. I mean, there's going to be points scored, but it's not going to be a boatload of points, and they're unlikely to go over 50 or 60 in terms of the total. Now that I said that, maybe 3 of these games go over 60, but yeah, first week, everybody's trying to feel each other out. The Vegas doesn't really know how good these teams are, and we've got several games here that are very low totals.
Briefly on the strength of schedule and opponent points allowed and all that kind of stuff. I wrote an article this offseason on 4 tips you don't hear everywhere else, and one of them was, prior to the season, strength of schedule is useful for basically nothing. And I broke down some historical numbers on that, like just in terms of one brief example from the very top. Running back points allowed last year, the Commanders were the 4th easiest matchup for running backs. The year before that, they were the 4th toughest matchup against running backs. So if you came into 2023 thinking, oh my gosh, I can't start my running backs against the Commanders because they were one of the best in the league, turns out they're one of the easiest in the league. And though there are examples like that littered all over the fantasy landscape. So typically with some of the best teams, some of the best defenses that keep a lot of their continuity, we can expect that things will look somewhat similar, but I'm really not putting a lot of stock in it. I agree with you. It's especially in week one of maybe all weeks, I'm just starting my studs. I'm starting the guys I drafted to start, and we'll see what happens if the defenses start to shake out. We'll need a couple weeks to even do that because we won't have, a good sample of data otherwise. All right. That is matchups. Let's get into the starts and sits of the week. Well, you've got 2 at each position, a start and a sit. Let's start with running back. Who are you highlighting?
Zamir White. I think I've kind of oscillated on him a little bit. I was a little worried that I was going to have another Alexander Madison on my hand, but the more I'm researching him, I think he's just a better player. And it does seem like the Raiders are extremely excited about him. Antonio Pierce, over the last week or so, has even underscored the fact that White was the lead back. He said on early downs, we're going to see a lot of number 3, and that's Zamir White's number. Hat tip to our recent guest, Greg Branos, Coach Speak Index for finding that little nugget. And he was 9th in yards after contact per attempt. He had the 20th rushing grade out of 55 backs, so solid in that span per PFF, and that was during that 4-game span where he was the lead back. He had 83, 145, 106, and 121 total yards. And the Chargers were kind of middle of the pack in rushing yards, as we mentioned. Can't really trust those numbers, but I think you're seeing White in a pretty big role in what should be a competitive game. I don't think the Chargers are going to run away with this one. The Raiders have a solid defense and a pretty solid offensive line. I think this is a good spot for Zamir White.
I absolutely love Zamir White, and will be starting him in a couple spots and have to decide whether to start him or Aaron Jones in a dynasty league. So maybe I'll let this convince me and go Zamir White. Huge agree here. How about your sit?
A little worried about Brian Robinson's workload week 1. We don't know what's going to happen exactly with Austin Eckler in this backfield. He might, Robinson might turn in a good game. The matchup, again, can't trust it, but the Bucs have been pretty good against the run. I think for the last couple of years, they were 4th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs last year. So it just is all adding up here to be a kind of a timeshare and a bad matchup. So I'm going to avoid Robinson if I can.
This is one where we really think we need to see how this backfield shakes out for the first couple weeks. It's so tough to know, and we try to figure it out in draft season between Eckler and Robinson what to expect. But is Eckler the guy we saw for a few years before last, where he was the RB1 in fantasy, or certainly one of the best, or is he the guy we saw last year that looked like half of a fullback speed? And almost completely lost all his juice. If so, then it feels like Brian Robinson takes over. Obviously, Eckler could always hang around for the pass catching. So I'd like to see how this offense looks for a couple weeks before I'm really making confident calls on either guy. All right, wide receiver. This is a spicy start. We've talked about it a little bit this offseason. Someone that there's been hope for, but maybe little else besides hope. But your hope is high.
Yes, and we were, when I was putting this together, the guy I wanted to put here was Xavier Worthy, but he played last night, and we weren't going to be able to tout him as a sneaky start. He turned in a good game, even though it was low volume. I'm going to go with another guy who's probably going to get low volume, but should have a good game, Jameson Williams. Really sketchy defense here with the Rams indoors at Detroit. You're really looking at Jared Goff having a good game. I think Williams will capitalize on that. And one thing that they didn't do a whole lot of last year was be able to stretch the field. And I think like the Chiefs, they're going to want to do that. And I think Williams will catch at least one long one and perhaps catch a touchdown as well. Basically, he has won that starting job and should play quite a few snaps there with Josh Reynolds out of the picture. I'm expecting a good game from him.
I might need a big play, but hopefully we get it. It would be nice to see from Jameson Williams, who has missed a lot of time and then not been super involved, but was very, very highly touted prospect. So we'll see what happens there. And if he does blow up, or at least step up, Jared Goff, the Goff Gambit's going to be hot. So that would be great. And then your sit is a player that I kind of have liked, but feels a little questionable. I think he's been dealing with some injury as well over in Seattle.
Yeah, I love Tyler Lockett. Everyone knows that. I've been on him, especially since Matt Harmon really touted his route running over at Reception Perception. And it took him an extra year to really flourish into a top fantasy guy. But he's been dealing with a thigh injury in preseason. As of Thursday, he was still limited. So I just think this is adding up to be maybe a game where he doesn't play quite as many snaps. Jackson Smith and Jigba is ready to take the step forward, and maybe Lockett isn't out there. Denver's defense we'll see how it is. It was 4th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers last year. I could see Lockett having a good game, but I just don't think he's going to have one of his monster games that he has every once in a while, just given the thigh injury and the emergence of JSN.
One other one that I'll throw out there, because it's been one of our favorites to hit on this offseason, is Joshua Palmer. Worth noting, we talked about, will it be Palmer, McConkey that really steps up and becomes wide receiver 1 for the Chargers? if there's going to be a week where I'd take Palmer over Conky, it would be week 1 when the rookie is, might still need some time to ramp up. So I also like the matchup with the Raiders. I think this should be a fun game. Divisional games sometimes can be tougher, but Chargers Raiders feels like one where we might get a decent amount of points. More, I would take the over here. So I'd roll out Joshua Palmer if you need another sleepy start. Well, let's go to tight end. We're going with another guy that we've talked up this offseason quite a bit. You in particular have loved this tight end.
I also have Joshua Palmer as a sleeper and a sneaky start.
Let's go.
Not a sleepy start.
Oh,
we'll get it together. I'm gonna cut you some slack because you're sick. So tight end, I've been talking about Jonnu Smith. I'm rolling with him against Jacksonville, high scoring game. I think they sort of unleash him. And he gets something, like he gets a touchdown or he gets a big gainer. He's a yak guy. They're going to scheme. I think Mike McDaniel's looking forward to using him, and they've got a few plays drawn up for him. And so I like him as a guy you could probably pick up off the waiver wire in most leagues and throw into your tight end one spot if you punted the position.
I can't remember which depth chart it was. Obviously, different sites have different depth charts, but there was one point. Okay, it's the Dolphins site itself. They have Jonnu Smith listed as the second fullback behind Alec Ingold on their website depth chart. That's super fun. We saw a bit of that from Arthur Smith last year, and maybe Mike McDaniel saw that and said, well, Arthur Smith might not do very much well, but using Jonnu Smith out of the backfield and in sneaky little ways was effective. So that could boost his value quite a bit.
Yeah, and I read up on that. I think in that offense that this is basically a position where they're going to be able. They used Alex Ingold in this position. They've used Raheem Mostert at times in this position. Ingold could block. Raheem Mostert can block. Can't really catch, but they wanted to find a player that could block if not necessary, but then also catch the ball. And Jonnu Smith is going to be that player. So it's not really fullback. It's we'll see how it shakes out, but it looks to me like it's very much a versatile position. There was a really good breakdown of that. I'm looking for it on Twitter. I can't find it right there at the moment. I didn't know you were going to mention the F depth chart there. So as far as my set, go ahead.
I feel like it's a Taysom back is what it is.
It could be, yeah.
We need a new position for whatever he does, and now maybe Jonnu Smith will do.
Yeah. Cole Kmet is my sit. I have been off of him all offseason, and it's gotten worse because Gerald Everett basically has been playing as much or more than him in the preseason and doing pretty well. Shane Waldron has a long history with Gerald Everett and trusts him, and they went out and signed him as a free agent. So I'm just staying away from Cole Kmet. Tennessee also fourth against tight ends. I don't think that really matters a whole lot, but it is something to note. I would bench Cole Kmet if you happen to have him this week.
Yeah, I've been a Cole Kmet truther for many, many years. I've really liked him in the past. But we talked this offseason quite a bit about how tough it's going to be for a rookie quarterback to support 3 really good wide receivers. Now you also drop down to the tight end. There's another tight end who can catch passes. And the running backs, at least one of them, is very good at catching passes. There is so little on the bone, I think, for Cole Kmet to have a strong year. So he's like borderline tight end 2 or borderline outside tight end 2 range for me. I would 100% agree here. And then we'll close it out with quarterback. And who else for the start? It had to be him.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my core quarterback strategies this year. Especially if you were to miss out on maybe a stud quarterback that you liked, like Kyler Murray or whatever, but I had to fall back to a Jared Goff, Brock Purdy committee in my longtime keeper league. One of the other owners just likes to take my favorite players just to make me angry and spite me, and he took Jaden Daniels the round as his second quarterback, the round I was going to take him. But I was fine with that. It's a 6-point pass TD league as well. So these are the 2 quarterbacks I have, Goff and Purdy, and they both finished like top 6 or 7 in this format last year. And this is my exact decision this week, and it's not really much of a decision. Goff at home against the Rams. I'm just going to start him at home unless he's got a really bad matchup or something at home. And my sit of the week is Brock Purdy at home against the Jets. Jets have a very stingy defense. They still have a very stingy defense. I think Purdy could still put up decent numbers in a pinch if you don't have another good option at the position. But I'm not expecting a typical 250, 2 or 3 touchdown game from Brock Purdy against a pretty stingy Jets defense. But love Goff this week. Love the overs on most of that stuff. Although they look like they have kind of baked in his home splits now and some of the pick'em sites and stuff. His yardage is up there, but he is pretty much to average 270 plus and 2.5 to 2.7 touchdowns per game in the last 17 home games. So not always a huge yardage guy, but typically throws at least 2 touchdowns, and that'll get you there as your QB1.
Yeah, love both these calls. And as a note, if you drafted Brock Purdy, which you should have done at the very least towards the end of the top 12 quarterbacks, if not after, you should have another option, in my opinion, that you can be rotating in matchups like this. So sit Brock Purdy is a great one. Start Jared Goff is an even better one. I like both of the quarterbacks, obviously. Guilty of liking the old guy in Matthew Stafford in this game. We have a bold predictions piece over at the NFL, and I wrote for mine for this week was that the 2 quarterbacks would combine for 700 yards and 7 passing touchdowns. I think this could be a super, super fun game. We'd be happy to roll out either guy, and we should see a ton of fantasy points, which is like how we like to kick off week 1 with fantasy points from the guys that we start. Looking at you, Mark Andrews. All right. That is it for the week 1 Friday edition of the Most Accurate Podcast. Any closing thoughts, exciting things to look forward to, any besides tonight's game, of course, heading into this weekend? John.
Yes, Sneaky Starts is up on the site now, and I will underline that Matthew Stafford was my number 2 quarterback in the Sneaky Starts. Really, that's going to be a fun one. And I will be doing a Discord chat at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific today to take my lumps from the Mark Andrews managers, kind of talk them off the ledge, hopefully, and answer any other lineup questions here before the Packers Eagles kickoff at 5:30 Pacific in Brazil. I'm looking forward to watching Jordan Love and his trio or quadruple or whatever 5-pack receivers hopefully dice up the Eagles, but I'm bracing for an early season disappointment as well. So we'll see. Typical Packer fan right there for you.
Absolutely. Listen, it's valid. It's football time. We're allowed to be fans. This should be fun. Also, if you guys are looking for my stuff, you will see me on Monday. I am doing the waiver wire, pretty much all the waiver wire content here at 4for4. So there will be a Discord chat on Tuesday night, the waiver wire article on Monday, and also a waiver wire pod solo me. Hopefully my sickness is gone by then, so no one has to deal with my voice for the entire podcast. But that is where you will find me early next week.
Yeah, and one last thing, use code John25 for 25% off any subscription at 4for4. You can also get a free sub by just a deposit, like a $10 deposit at any one of our many partners. So check my feed for that, or just go to 4for4.com and hit subscribe, and all the information is there. And we're going to be here every morning, or I guess it's noon at Eastern, at 9 a.m. on Pacific for the whole season, breaking down the latest news, injuries, and getting into the matchups and sneaky starts, etc. Getting you ready to set your lineups for this week, every week.
Goodness for the entire season. We will see you all there weekly. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. Adios. See you in week 1.